Since your class is about art as tools for social change, this topic is zines as a tool for social change. So as you know, my name is Taylor, and I'm a zine librarian for Papercut Zine Library. We operate on a non-hierarchical consensus-based model, and we are involved with a variety of community outreach projects, from workshops on harm reduction to zine making at public libraries. We're committed to archiving zines as well as fostering creativity and community around zines today. And we have an emphasis on doing work that you want to do and you dream of doing and that you're capable of doing, especially when volunteering. And we're a place that kind of just rolls with the punches. When COVID started, we made a virtual catalog, which you can find on our website, and a monthly Skillshare to keep people engaged. So we've had one on podcasts, one on stop motion. We have one on lino cuts coming up. These are some pictures of our library at the Democracy Center in Harvard Square. Sadly, we can't be in the space right now because of COVID, but when we do reopen up, this is where it will be. It's a free place, so y'all can come whenever you'd like. So I'm going to give you a brief history of zines. So you can trace zine making back to the 1800s with the practice of scrapbooking. And an interesting fact is a man named William Dorsey who created over 400 scrapbooks using the technique like in the picture, highlighting significant events in Black history from 1847 to 1906. This is a huge cultural artifact that we wouldn't have without this practice. In the 1830s, the abolitionist movement used them. In the early 1920s, Black artists created a zine. Sadly, only one was ever made that focused on young Black artists, such as Langston Hughes. In the 1950s, sci-fi used what was then called fanzines and is now just today called zines because we decided to shorten the word. And they have an award at this particular convention that started in 1955 and is still given out today. And at the same time, we had the Black Freedom Movement using zines like the Black Panther Party to spread information about their party and their work and their mission. And again, at the same time, in the late 60s, the series Star Trek became super popular, and the first fanzine came out, Spockenalia, and this really solidified the use of zines in the sci-fi world. The women's liberation movement used them in the 1970s, such as this one, Women in Their Bodies, to spread information, just like the Black Panther group did about, about their causes. And then we start to move into or away from the let's use this for social change and use them in punk music, and they were grungier and DIY aesthetic, similar to what you see today. And then in the 1990s, you have a mix of those two, the social change and the music being combined with the Riot Grrrl movement, with bands such as Bikini Kill. Someone had asked me what drew me to zine making, and it was a culmination of really small events starting when I was a teenager, with my favorite film, 10 Things I Hate About You. But I didn't make that connection until I was in grad school. I was fascinated with the idea of these all-women punk groups, some of whom did not know how to play their instruments when they started their band, get up, make music and zines about topics they cared about, that the media and just society in general were not talking about, specifically sexual abuse. Um, and today, zines are considered useful historical documents, and many universities are now creating zine libraries, as well as there are so many independent zine libraries around the world. I think I know of like 5 at the top of my head in the US alone. The next section I wanted to go into was about kind of formatting zines, how to include, what to include, how we get inspired, since many of your questions revolved around that aspect. Um, I know you all are creating a zine collaboratively together, and I don't know exactly how it's working, but my colleagues and I thought that these following points would be helpful to you all when creating your zine together. Um, so making sure that each team member has a certain number of pages and that they're all equal, writing a summary of the zine that will be included, kind of like an introduction to your zine. Um, Remember to have fun, that this is a class project, but this is also something that you're doing to create art, and I hope you enjoy art since you're taking this class. Using Google Docs and slides so that everyone knows who is contributing what along the way. You can see what other people are being inspired by, are writing, are creating art for. Recommending some sort of group contract so that everyone knows who is responsible for what, when the due dates are, who's working on what, etc. And that you as a group should create the introduction, the table of contents, and the works cited page together. You should have a works cited page if you are doing an informational zine, so that people know where you got your information from. Um, and then if you are making a zine outside of this class and you want to work collaboratively with people, you should find people who are enthusiastic about, one, working with you, but also enthusiastic about the topic you choose. And it also might be helpful to find someone who has a vested interest in the topic and knows a lot about the topic where you can source information from. So you asked us what our process for getting started was. I've grouped these into 4 sections based off of different techniques that my colleagues and I generally use. So many of us will start with the writing, either handwriting or typing it out while thinking about what images would be powerful to use alongside what we're writing about, then collect those images and use the cut and paste method of putting the zine together. So we'll print out those images, we'll print out their writing, and we'll cut it out manually and paste it onto some paper. Um, all of us kind of prefer that method of putting zines together, but you can put a zine together digitally. I have done that as well. I did that in Word for the 2 zines that I shared with you all. I don't recommend it, but it's possible. Um, we also start with topics that excite us, and we include specific themes and energy that we want to put into the zine. We also start with the size. If you're making a mini zine, you only have 8 small pages to work with, technically 6 if you decide not to do information on the back cover. And that's a very small amount of time, so you have to plan what you want to put in there. Um, yeah. we'll look through reference materials such as magazines, books, snail mail, and just cut out whatever is inspiring to us, whatever we like, and kind of just put those images into groups. And when we feel that we have enough images that speaks to our topic, create a piece of work out of those. One of my colleagues has a typewriter, so they're able to cut and paste super quickly. And they also said that one of the hardest things for them was getting past the mental barriers, because being vulnerable is difficult. I don't know why my script is not loading. And the last thing was setting aside a specific amount of time to get into the headspace of creating your zine. The person who said this really makes art heavy zines. So they set about an hour of time for themselves to work on the zine and to like meditate beforehand, to get into the space of creativity. So how do we make decisions about what to include? This question is very difficult because it varies so much by person and by topic for your zine. We all decided that for art, it must be able to stand on its own and not just be filler in the zine. It's good to have a balance of art and writing. You want to think about what you want someone to know or feel from in the zine. Should they be inspired by your zine, or should they just know more about the topic that your zine is on? And for call to action zines, think about the obstacles that the reader may face and how you can help the reader achieve that call to action despite obstacles. How you can anticipate setbacks, offering preventative plans, etc. And you asked us what we did for inspiration. This is a very long list. Personally, I pull from my life, issues I'm dealing with, mental and physical health conditions that I have. I think about what I need and I make a zine about that, hoping that others will also find that information helpful. And then, like I said before, I kind of just go through magazines, cut out what I find interesting, and when I have enough, I put it together. My colleague has recommended two other things. They recommend reading a bunch of different zine genres and making notes about what stood out, and then you can include those elements in your own zine. And if you're really stuck, they recommend making a mini zine like y'all are doing in your class on a how-to. You know how to do something, so write about that. It can be making spaghetti, driving a car, dog sitting, whatever. But once you've made one zine, it's easier to make another and just keep going.
I like that idea.
So the next, what was that?
I like that idea. I'm thinking of what I know how to do to make a zine out of. Thanks.
Yeah, I haven't done that idea, but I really like that too. So I might go do that later. There are many types of zines, but I'm just gonna mention these three because I find them helpful when thinking about what kind of zine to produce. So like there's informational, personal, and a combination of those two. And they have many things in common, but the biggest is what you want your readers to take away. So for informational zines, you should know your audience. Who are you trying to reach with the information in your zine? If you're talking about climate justice, like someone had mentioned, Are you trying to reach people who don't know a lot about climate justice? Or are you trying to reach people who know a lot about climate justice? And those are two very different directions to go with your zine. You want to make sure that you provide multiple sources. You can get info from textbooks, internet, scholarly articles, interviews, magazines, but make sure you have a works cited page in your zine. You want to state your intentions and your background. So, if you're writing a zine on race and you're a white person, you need to state that. The reader needs to know where you're coming from and where you're getting your info from. And having a table of contents is helpful. For personal zines, what you want to say can come from your lived experience, memories, photographs, old letters, old journals, old notebooks. How you want to convey that message. Is it more powerful in writing? Is it more powerful in images? Is it more powerful with a combination of the two, such as collaging does a lot of the time? And identifiers, do you want your name known? And you want to use pseudonyms for friends, acquaintances, personal people that you're close to in your life, unless you have their explicit permission to use their name. You don't want them identified and possibly targeted for what you write about your personal life. And then for combination zines, the biggest thing is your topic more impactful by sharing personal stories? If it's not, then you might just want to go with a informational zine. And I will point out each of these types of zines as we go on. So, zine making as collective and individual empowerment. It allows your authors to control their story. For me, being able to control my story meant I put my story into my zine anonymously since it was a submission-based zine. This created a space for me to share what happened without the world knowing it was me, because I was not ready for that. But I was ready to share what had happened to me and find a community of survivors and support and love. And this piece was cathartic and freeing to write, and it felt allowed me to feel less shameful and stop blaming myself for what had happened. This also brings up the idea of radical vulnerability, and that's the idea of being vulnerable is a revolutionary act in a world that tells us we must be strong. So zines create a space for people to share their experiences, which in turn allows others to learn from those. Zines are a site of community in and of themselves, and to be able to share one story and have that returned by those around you is reassuring and therapeutic. When we do this, we create a cycle of empowerment. We empower those around us to be vulnerable. At the same time, we break down stigmas that tell us that we must remain stoic, silent, and strong. This visibility is especially important for those of us who are mentally ill, and even more so for those of us who have trauma-induced illnesses, as well as for those who hold a myriad intersecting marginalized identities and backgrounds. Mainstream society pressures people to feel empowered by making purchases, keeping up with the latest trends. The message you get is that purchasing will make you feel empowered and feel at home in your skin. Zines offer a different view, a counter discourse that prompt readers to be empowered by what they do and not by what they purchase. Purchasing your embodiment cannot be done. It is not a part of capitalism, although they do operate within capitalism. One of the zines I shared with you all, one of the authors used self-care practices that were touted by society, and they did nothing for her. But what did help was finding community and love through particularly not through zines this time, but through people that were going through the same issues that they were, and that allowed them to heal. Zines are messy, inefficient, and labor intensive. You create a piece of work that is deliberately you. You put care and pleasure into your work, and the labor is cathartic and inspiring, for both for you and for the people that read it. Um, this first zine that I'm sharing is by one of my favorite zine makers, Karina Killjoy. They use the topic of radical vulnerability in their zines, and they do this by using lots of color in their zines alongside being vulnerable about what they write. This scene in particular is empowering because it offers affirmations to for survivors and creates a community of people who can use these zines to heal. But the author can also use their own zines as a reminder um, to themselves about the healing that they've done. Um, and when that healing isn't so linear, they can use them to heal again. This second zine is an informational zine that empowers menstruators to take charge of their own bodies. They use gender inclusive language because not all women menstruate and not all those who menstruate are women. They use creative ways to engage the reader, like this connect the dots, still while empowering them and giving them information that is useful to them. This scene, the example here is the beginning and ending of this piece. I could not include the entire story. It took up 5 pages of a zine, but they use an essay format to convey their story. So this is a personal zine, and it's about coming into their body through, I think, through martial arts. Um, so this example uses a comic book style to convey their message, their path to healing. They use images to convey a deeper meaning to their words. The art adds to their story. We can understand their story without the pictures, but the use of art creates a deeper meaning and understanding of what the author went through. In this particular example, the forest um, represents a jail cell. This example is a submission-based personal zine, and what's important for them in their introduction is that the zine did not turn out what they had originally thought it was going to turn out like. They also wanted to do this collaboratively, but it didn't work out, so they ended up using submissions instead. And it's really important to be flexible in your zine making because things may not come out how you planned, and that's okay. Zines are not meant to be perfect. They're forever changing. My colleague has a zine that had two prints, and in the second print, they acknowledged something that they had put in the first one that they took out that they had a problem with later on. And so, you might create something and then 5 years later go back and be like, that wasn't so great, and address it in a new zine.
That's interesting to think about that you can, maybe we'll print out a run and then like later on, if you wanted to change parts of it, you can. So that's just an interesting thing to think about when you guys are working. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and it's no, that's a really good point, and I think it's also interesting to note that a lot of the zines that were created in the Riot Grrrl movement did not age well. Some of them did, some of them did not. Um, there's a lot of discussion that comes off as turf, and that's not great.
Hmm.
Um, but the work that they did as a whole is really great, and you can't separate that from history, but you can look back with it with a critical eye.
For sure.
So using zines as a tool for activism and community engagement, you want to be careful about whose story you are telling. You can start with your own experience and then have people engage with it without telling someone else's story, but you do not want to tell someone else's story. That is not okay. It brings visibility to topics. Um, and I think something interesting with this point is that as zine makers evolve over time, many of them switch from discussing personal issues to making more informational zines about the same topic that will help other readers. And you provide resources. Um, Both in the here is this website or phone number or Twitter, you can get information from, but also that zinesters unearth healing practices that work for them and share them with the community, promoting new and unique healing practices in others. So it is sharing information that others can use. Uh, Zines are effective ways of sharing information to a specific audience. For example, one of my colleagues made a zine about how to use Narcan, now naloxone, because there was a huge spike in heroin deaths and they wanted to help out a community that was close to them and affected by this. And they were able to create a zine with how-tos and resources of where to get Narcan and how to help. Um, but they did not include a personal story, which would not have been relevant to the information in the zine, even though that story is what prompted them to make the zine in the first place. So the zine is very targeted to a specific audience and was able to bring an awareness to an issue. So this zine is an informational zine about the prison industrial complex. And in their intro, which is the small little box above the flags, they state who they are, where they get their information, as well as what they might be lacking in their knowledge, which is okay to do. Like, you don't know everything. And what you're doing is sharing the information that you do know and saying, I don't know everything, but here's what I do know. And this is contributing to the conversation. Um, they also have a table of contents, which you can see is very dense and very long. This zine is 44 pages.
Oh my God.
But it's super helpful to know what they cover in their zine. So this next zine was made specifically for community use. And it says it underneath December 2017 in small italics there. But again, they have an index / table of contents. In the back of their zine, they have acknowledgments about who helped them with this zine, both information wise and with the creation of the zine. But they also make the zine interactive. There's flowcharts about maybe what you should do in this situation, and there's pages that you can fill out, making this zine extremely useful.
I really like seeing those pages, and I'm reminded of earlier you showed us the connect the dots page. So I think that could be an interesting road to take if there's some way that you could make your zine or a page in your zine have like an interactive element, and it could be something fun like play a game, or it could be something like a flow chart. So I thank you for showing those examples. Those are also cool ideas that you guys can stick in your back pockets.
Yeah, and I have another example in the next slide or two.
Ooh, yay.
So this is an example of a combination zine that works with people who were victims and the justice system decided to incarcerate them. So this zine uses artwork, personal stories, and information specifically about laws that affect victims to make their zine effective. Um, Without the personal stories, I don't think the zine would be as effective because they would just be talking about the laws that these people are affected by, particularly domestic violence survivors. Um, so this next zine uses creative ways to share their information, such as a crossword that has vocabulary in it, which is extremely informational. This is a combination zine. Um, they also use art slash a collage and writing to tell personal narratives. And something I didn't include on this slide was that they use a Dear Reader page, so sort of an introduction, uh, telling readers what is in the zine and where the authors are coming from. So all of the authors were South Asian, multiracial, and white. This zine is sort of like I stated with the Bikini Kill zine, where it didn't exactly age well, and so you can see that this is documenting history from 1968 to 1973 about Chicago's abortion service. And we have this in our in our archive with Papercut Zine Library. But I think something that's really important to point out is that the people that performed these abortions were not medical professionals, and that they were doing this illegally before the Supreme Court um, decided Roe versus Wade. And so they state that in this scene, um, so that people reading this scene know that this is not medically accurate information or really a way you should go about this information anymore or about abortion today anymore. And that's it.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much. I loved seeing all the examples of different zines, and I really like how you uh, broke down zines into categories, like informational, personal, and combination. I thought that was a really interesting way to just kind of frame zines and for our students who are thinking about, you know, what road we're going to go down. I'd love to maybe open it up to some questions that you guys might have for Taylor while they're with us. Marin?
Definitely.
Oh, I'm gonna hover over close to Marin so she can talk into into the microphone.
First of all, I like your background. Are you in the TARDIS?
I am.
I love Doctor Who. I just needed to ask. And what would you say is like the most impactful for you zine that you've made? And why was it most impactful for you?
Yeah. I did think about this question a lot. I really liked it, but I couldn't figure out where to incorporate it in the presentation. I think kind of a culmination of a few different parts of my identity is what's most impactful, coming out as queer, coming out as neurodivergent, and coming out as polyamorous, um, which didn't all happen at once. But once I was able to accept one part of my identity, it allowed me to be more open to myself, be more honest with myself, to accept other parts of myself. You know, when I was in high school, being gay for me was just a phase. There were 3 people out in my high school of 3,000. So it wasn't even an option for me. so it took many years of unpacking my own internalized homophobia to do that. Um, and I think that combined with sadly some of the trauma I have has inspired my zines the most. The zines that I shared with you all were the first two zines that I've made. Um, and they're about trauma and self-care and about my healing, which is a huge part of my life. Um, and those zines actually influenced what I did my master's thesis on, um, and is where I am here, where I am now, which I love where I am, but it took a lot of work to get there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's important for all of us to hear and know, is that, you know, the kind of struggles we go through, there are ways to find outlets to express ourselves and find ourselves. And I think art making is a really powerful way to do that. So I'm happy that your journey has led you to where you are now, because it seems like you're in a really cool place. So, um, does anybody else have any questions? Any other questions? Maybe your question didn't get that you submitted. Didn't get answered. Taylor, could you talk a little bit about the zine library at Simmons and your
Oh
experience
yes.
there?
Yeah, so the university I went to, Simmons University, which is in Boston over by Fenway, has a zine collection that was started by one of their librarians there. Most of it is older zines from the 90s in their collection, but they also print students' zines. So you could submit a zine to the library and they will print it out, like many numerous copies, and it will be on top of the other zine collection they have. And you can just go and take these zines. I don't think I showed any of the, oh, actually, no, the one that said, let's talk about race, was actually from students at the undergrad level. This also influenced what I did my thesis on. I would just go to the library maybe once a week, maybe once a month, depending on my schedule, and just see what zines were there for free and collect them. And I used some of them in my thesis. And so there are other zine libraries that do that as well. I don't think there are any in Boston. The next closest one is Barnard, which is in New York City.
It's interesting because some of our students here are going to school next year. So I implore you guys, wherever you end up, to check out if your school has a zine library. And maybe if you get really into it, you can start the zine library at your school. And maybe we can start a little one here at Rivers with the zines we make. How about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea of starting your own. You can just start with the ones that you all make. I think part of the one at Simmons started with the students one is that the librarian that created the zine collection taught classes about zines and had her students make them. And that's what started the free collection of library. So it starts with you all.
Yay. So exciting. Okay, so let's open it up. Any last questions before we get started on making our own zines some more, or working on our own zines some more? We still have some time to go back to the classroom and do that. No? All right, well, let's give Taylor a round of applause and thank them so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And I thought the information was super helpful and inspirational to see just how powerful this tool actually is. to not only share information about yourself, but to learn information about others and learn about movements and just things that are important in our world. And I think thank you also for sharing the history of zines. That kind of gives us a little bit of context to where it is today. And even zines like the last one you shared, that's like a little outdated. I think it's still interesting to look back on stuff like that and see where we are today, and how far we've come and what life was like for people in that time. So thank you again, Taylor. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it was lovely speaking here today. And if anyone has any questions they didn't want to ask out loud, feel free to pass those on.
Yeah.